Okay, you guys, thank you so much for coming. This is our first ever Night Connecting Things event, and we're stoked to have you. Tonight's topic is creatives in tech, and we have an awesome panel. I'm Amy Hood. I'm going to be the moderator. I'm with Hoodzpah Design Co. in Newport Beach, and I'm also one of the co-founders of Connecting Things. So I'm going to be your Barbara Walters tonight. I'm going to ask the hard-hitting questions. And if you guys have any questions that I don't get to, make sure you just remember them for the end of the night. And we're going to have a Q&A session where you guys can ask the panelists questions. And that's going to be for about like 20 minutes. So yeah, so hold on to your questions. And I think we're just going to start with Aubrey and go down the line. And you guys can just introduce yourself, do like the Twitter bio.
Okay. My name's Aubrey. I'm a designer. I've been designing for startups pretty much my whole career. Some good ones and some stinkers. And then most recently, I did 3 years at Science in LA in Santa Monica, where I helped a bunch of the portfolio companies do design and figure out their products and help them hire designers and a whole bunch of other stuff. And then in January, I jumped out to do full-time freelance, and I've been doing that since January, and it's been going all right. Yeah.
Awesome. My name's Josh. I kind of have a mixed background in working in creative agencies and startups. Most recently, I'm head of creative over at Payoff in Costa Mesa, which is a financial wellness company. Lead a rad creative team there, working on a bunch of rad finance products. Before then, I worked at a creative agency in Irvine called Envoy, and then before that, I worked at a company called Nest Labs, maker of a smart thermostat, and then small company,
Nest,
and then before that, My Energy. So it's been a mix of startups and agencies throughout my career.
And my name's Joel Beukelman, and I have a traditional print background, working in small, unattractive in-house like jobs. Spent some time in startups, a couple years in Netflix, and now on Android at Google doing UX.
Nice.
Small product.
Small startup.
Right on.
Podcast, videos, whatever.
So we're going to start out with kind of probably a question you guys get asked all the time, which is, what are some of the disadvantages and advantages of being in Orange County versus the Bay Area or Silicon Valley, where everyone sees the tech bubble is?
Yeah. Oh, me first. All right. So I lived in the Bay Area for a year, and I lived there before that. For a short period of time, I joined a startup called Twilio, and I was the second employee at Twilio, and designed their logo. I think that's the only thing left. Everything else, thank goodness, has been redone. That was a long time ago. And then I went back to Atlanta for a brief stint, and then I got hired as the design lead of this product that had come out that had a really infamous launch called Color. And yeah, that's always gets a couple of laughs when we talk about that one. And so Color, had kind of a failed launch, and then they did, I guess it's like Periscope, really, in 2012, peer-to-peer live video over mobile, and nobody cared. And then after that whole kind of wild ride, which you can read about on TechCrunch, I moved here, and I moved to work at Science. And so the question was, what are the advantages and disadvantages? I think that the advantages to being in the Bay Area are, I think a lot of people know what they are, right? There's a lot of products, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of smart people, there's good engineers, and so on. And the disadvantages are that you don't get to keep most of the money you make, right? You spend it all on rent. And I think that maybe even a bigger thought outside of that is that tends to be, from my experience, a bit of a monoculture, and that everybody wants to make a bot, right? Recently, that's kind of like, it comes with these fads where everyone's making photo apps, and then everybody's doing the Instagram for video, and then everybody's doing this thing and doing that thing, and it seems to be that everybody just kind of works on one thing. And that doesn't seem to be the case here. It seems that people have a more diversified approach to things, and because everything's spread out, there's less of that tendency to have a monoculture. Obviously, Orange County has, its stereotypes and so on. But I think that some of the advantages of being here that there's different types of creatives. It's not everybody's a product designer, right? That's kind of how it is in San Francisco or the Bay Area. And people here have these multidisciplinary backgrounds. And I don't know, what do you guys think? Jump in on this.
I mean, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I would say I'm the one that hasn't lived in the Bay Area. I worked with a company up there, and I traveled up there quite a bit for that company. But I think you're spot on in that sense. One thing I did learn is there's a lot of the expected people who build startups. It's the engineering culture, it's the product-minded people. And one thing, in the small bubble that I went up in Palo Alto, was really there wasn't the creativeness you see here for sure. I mean, this group specifically in Orange County is so diverse. Like the meetups that I did go through up there, it was everyone's a product designer. What are you working on? We're working on an app. What are you working on? No, maybe some hardware plus the software for the app, and it's exactly the same. And you just here, it's like I almost feel like we're the minority to some extent, right? So, and I think that's really interesting. I think there's a lot of different talent pools in Orange County that you can learn from and gain a different perspective in the way you build products, which has really been a benefit that I know we've tried to enable at the startups that I've worked on here.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I lived in the Bay Area for like 2 years, a little over 2 years. And I think the biggest advantage of being there is just straight opportunity. Like there's so much for being tech or being product designers or engineering. There's so much you can do up there, and really interesting, fascinating things because all the money and engineering talent's there. So being down here, I moved down specifically for family reasons, and Google is big enough to allow me to do that. But in doing that, I realized that although there's more diverse creatives here, it is very much more a restricted and almost not up to the pace of the Bay Area. So it is a monoculture up there, but there's a ton of opportunities. So there's a big contrast there. And then culturally as well, I moved down because me and my wife would go to dinner and feel awkward out to dinner because we had a family dinner and everyone's still like networking and drinking. And I think that's the benefit of this culture down in Orange County, but also part of its issue is that it's very like a safe, contained, predictable culture. And that's great for families, but not so much for diversity of culture from like as a global standpoint, and most tech products are global. And so I think that's a benefit. Something that I miss about the Bay Area is like there's everyone from all over the world, and even though they are kind of isolated in their scene, it's fascinating the amount of people that you meet from all over the world. And I miss that being down in Orange County for sure.
Joel, riffing off of what you guys were all saying, do you think though, since nobody down here really understands tech, do you think it's almost a benefit that they're not as familiar with these things? Like you're getting a blank slate of testing. It's really like you have to make sure that it's very user friendly.
Yeah, and I think there's an advantage. The disadvantage is like you have to find people to hire you that understand it, right? Like
right.
If there's not people that understand what you do to hire you for that thing, like that becomes a disadvantage. But for sure, it's I don't know if you guys would agree, but it's so much being like a bigger fish in a smaller pond, in the sense that I've been doing some events more recently, and I'm still describing what actual UX is or what product design is. And I think that still Orange County in Southern California has been such a business advertising space as far as design is concerned. The transition of that to actual product design and software is still kind of in its infant stage, I feel like. And there's a lot of things happening, which I think is exciting, but it's definitely not where the Bay Area is.
Right. So Josh, do you think that because you are a bigger fish in a smaller pond, has that helped you with your career to move faster almost? You guys have all had, I feel like, very, very big successes, and you've moved quickly up the ranks. You're all very young. Do you think that had something to do with it maybe?
Possibly. I think realistically, I think my biggest opportunity came from taking advantage of being somewhere else and being a unique kind. So I started off working remotely for companies to begin, and that's where I actually built most of my relationships, is working remotely. And I think being in areas like this kind of helps you do that, because you have such, because we're in like this central area of LA is right next to us, San Diego is right next to us. We are a flight away from San Francisco. I think that's I've been able to take advantage of that essentially, and that's really been a key advantage for me in this area specifically.
Right.
I think for me, I I don't know. I think that being in the Bay Area for that 1 year when I worked on color, even though that I totally failed, was a pretty big turning point for me. Like I'd go to meetups and people were like, "Oh yeah, I know color. Oh cool," and they knew something that I worked on. I think at that point, like Twilio, nobody really knew what that was. Maybe most people still don't know what that is, but people knew that one at least from its media coverage, and so then that was. Even though it didn't work, it seemed like people were like more trusting to work with me, like freelance clients. I started working with a lot of YC companies after that, and I don't know if being in Orange County has made it easier to be, to kind of crawl up, but for me that's not what happened. So I think I'm still trying to like just figure out how to navigate all that. I don't feel like that I've like made it,
Yeah, no, I don't think I would have had the opportunities I have if I didn't move. Like I went from a shitty print design job to a startup that failed to Netflix, but I got the job at Google because I worked at Netflix, not because of my education or my portfolio. It was a validation of working for one of those companies. And so I think there's a lot to be said, even if you want to be here, taking risks and going to New York or Austin or somewhere else to get validation because there's more opportunity, and then coming back. I think that's it. That's what I did, and I don't know if that's sustainable for everyone, but I think that there is something to be said to working for companies there. You gotta have good work, but if you have good work in context, there's a lot that comes with that working in a big company.
I think that I get a little bit more trust placed on me from working in the Bay Area or working with Bay Area companies for whatever reason. It's not like it's hard to say because you have that internal bias, right? Like you've worked in these places, but I do think that that people will just, because I worked at Twilio and literally the only thing left is the logo, they think I had anything to do with the whole rise of success of that company. I had nothing to do with it. I left pretty early on, but I still get to kind of coattails on it, I guess. And
Right, you get to throw that name out.
I mean, you got to make the most of, what you've done, right? And some of that is sales too, I think, personal sales. But yeah, I think there has been a pattern or a precedent of trust from working with Bay Area companies. So I think I agree with what you said, Joel, that if you have the opportunity to do something like that and go and learn how risk tolerant that environment is in comparison to here, you should check it out.
So if it is, there is a lot lacking here, like you guys said. So what are some of the things that need to happen in the future, or what are some things that are happening now even, that are going to get Orange County, up to speed? It's a tall order.
Money.
Yeah, I think there's a pattern with how it works in the Bay Area. There's usually a feeder school like Stanford or Berkeley or something like that. Venture money, so someone to fund these young entrepreneurs that come out of these high performance schools, and then a culture that tolerates risk, right? Like I think you mentioned that, like people don't go to family dinners. They work until 10:30 every night and fall asleep with their laptop on their face. However unhealthy that may be, they do it. And so I think that it's a lot of hard work more than it's always talent. And so I think that they just bust it pretty hard, and then there's some cool opportunities for good schools, venture money, or exits, right? Exits usually create ventures. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with Snapchat and if that has an exit, because that'll flood this region with a lot of money and a lot of wealthy people who will fund the next round of entrepreneurs. That's been the cycle in the Bay Area. And then exits like Oculus are really good for this area. And I think that as things like that continue to happen here, even as far up as LA, like where Disney bought Makers Studios, or what was that one? Machinima. It's about something for like $900 million. It was a big deal. When stuff like that happens, it's really good for us. And so, because it mints a bunch of entrepreneurial wealth that feeds into, your idea and your idea and your idea. And that's good for the ecosystem here. And without it, it doesn't work. And so I think you'll see that's why a lot of these other towns that want to be tech focused, if they don't have a hit app like that to fund the next round, it's not going to happen.
Right. There is a lot of talk, Joel, about people trying to be, it's like, oh, Vegas is going to be the next tech town, Austin's going to be the next tech town, like everyone is fighting so hard. So is it really important to be the town? I mean, how do we just get up to speed, you know?
I think, so I work remote for a very big company, right? I mean, there's 300 people here in Irvine. But even us at Google, us in Irvine are trying to make more product happen there. Mm-hmm. And even there, that we have to have like good product management, enough design and engineering on one office. And that's not the case. So it's really hard to keep things down here. And so I think it's, to echo what you said, Aubrey, is it's money and talent. And unfortunately, there's been enough happening in the Bay Area that most of the good people here have moved up. And so I think there's enough incentive to get people to move down because it's a better place to live. But, and there's a lot of money here too. Like there's a Maserati dealership down the street, right? It's just convincing those guys that like, it shouldn't be real estate, it should be tech, and it's a riskier culture. But that's how the Bay Area, like there's nothing in Palo Alto that's like attractive, mm-hmm. right? It's just where people live that have all the money. And so the businesses are built around those people with money. Because you can get a lunch with them, right? That's as simply as convenience for investors. Sure. And so the more that there's people down here that have money that are willing to invest in talent or poach talent to get back down here, I think the more you'll see that. And I think that's why New York is popping off, because there's people with money and a dense, population of people that are willing to work till 10 on their laptops. And the more that this culture mimics that, we'll see that. But I don't think it has anything to do with the city or proximity. It has to do with the people that are making, like this is a great example mm-hmm. of what needs to happen to make this more like the Bay Area, is cultivation of people and money and ideas all in one space. Yeah.
Right. And Josh, so like how much does education fall into that? Because obviously like a lot of schools around here, I forgot who I was talking to, but like UCI doesn't even have a graphic design centered major, I don't think. And so there's a lot of schools that are just very behind on offering the education to learn how to even, get these jobs. So how do we tackle that problem?
I mean, I think it's very similar to just as if you were to go to a company, what you gain out of the company is the relationships you build and kind of what you kind of can pull away from that, not necessarily what it's going to lead you to in the sense of the tactical job. It's more about like, how are you interacting with people and how are you building? I think it's the same way in the educational format. It's what people are you surrounding with and what are you guys trying to do to get beyond just that environment of schooling and what it may be. I mean, there are events like such to begin exploring and networking beyond that. And I think that's one of the key drivers in relationships for business as well. And I think probably speak for all of us, like it's the relationships and how we get to know people throughout our careers and what really help those advancements. And I don't think it's any different for schooling. I think it's probably a benefit.
So then, like when you guys are hiring, like say at Google, when you're hiring people, if they don't have a degree in the thing that you're hiring for, are you willing to hire them if they have the personality and like the gusto and the gumption to learn it, or?
So whether I'm willing to hire them, whether Google is very different. Mark is probably a better person to talk about that. It's funny because, so I had this like revelation this week as I was thinking about some of these things, and that like product design, physical things like toasters and alarms and like actual products, there's school for that, right? To be an industrial designer. And I think we were all part of a movement where we did digital graphic design or web design and figured out we could take a fork in the road to actually build product. It just happens to be digital. And I think that's something that this area is still understanding. It's like, this isn't graphic design, this is product design. And there's a lot that goes into that. And so like I got my degree in like logos and color theory, right? Not in product design, but I kind of caught that wave and followed people on Twitter and shot free conferences to meet people to get there. But it's established now. So I think that it is more expected or required to have, if not a formal education and like HCI or something, at least experience of building things and hustling it out, because there's no excuse not to do that.
Right.
So I think a lot of it is just showing some curiosity and self-learning, because that's how like the whole Bay Area is just hustle and iterating. There's no plan beyond 12 months. Like they're just getting it. That's called agile, but it's not. There's no real process, and that's why there's I was talking to my manager last night. There's this progression of senior designers and junior designers that want to get in, but the industry doesn't really mentor people because they're just running.
Right.
And so there was a group of people that got it, and those they're trying to catch up, and there's education hasn't. So this weird, like, rich or poor as far as experience and non-experience within design, which is interesting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. The education thing is interesting. I wonder, I have a question. How many people here are designers? Can you raise your hand? All right. And then leave your hands up if you're a designer. And then can you leave your hand up if you went to a 4-year school for design? Boom. Like half or more just dropped their hands. So like, right, they didn't, there's not a whole lot of education, but I'm sure there are at least a couple good designers out there. More than a couple, probably all. Most of the people that I've hired on design teams that I've worked on they had high school, a lot of them had high school diplomas, and that was it. Maybe some community college, but their portfolios were out of control. That's what drove the hire and the ability to like talk about the work and like their performance, not like their degree. And I got an offer from Google a long time ago, and they like shorted me. I thought they shorted me. And then the reply was because I didn't go to a Ivy League school, and I was like, "What the hell? Ivy League school has a design program."
Cal State San Bernardino.
Kind of a weird reply. So I'm not like a big believer in like the education stuff. Maybe in the past, but now that Stanford and some of these other schools are developing programs around product design, it's got to be hard to build a curriculum around something that changes every like 30 minutes. You know?
Right.
Yeah, and I don't do a lot of hiring. I know you do probably more hiring, Josh, but I know that the most of the people that get rejected that I try to refer down here, it's all based on the understanding of product. And that's why I encourage people to work for a big company that does product, because you understand the depth and the complexity of what product design is. It's easy to look at the surface like, oh, I can make that screen. But there's a lot that goes into that. And until you understand that concept, it's very easy in the interview process to be like, yeah, you've got chops, but you don't get it. And unfortunately, we're not willing to say, we'll spend an next year and mentor you to get you there.
Right.
And that's really hard to find.
Right. Doesn't it ever feel like a rigged system if you have to know product before you can work at a product company?
Mm-hmm.
So like, how do you conquer that? Do you have to make your own?
You drink beers with people.
Yeah.
Oh, I met a guy at South by Southwest, and he was like, hey, you should come work at Netflix. I was like, I don't know how to do that. He's like, okay, like, we'll figure it out. I mean, I don't know how you guys figure it out, but...
I think it's how you define product too. I think a lot of people don't realize a lot of what they're doing is communicating, right? And if you can be able to communicate and inform, like that is a key to product design. It's just a different format a lot of times in this digital and app space and things like that. But if you can see that in, for instance, some of the graphic design that you're doing and just some of the other art pieces that you're doing, like communication is a sole part of what I hire for. Like, can you come in and just talk and understand like what is it that you're doing and trying to solve? And even if this problem isn't similar or in the same vein of what I'm looking for, if there's something there that you're trying to think through and communicate, like that is a key part of it. And so I wouldn't necessarily look at a product as only like an app or a piece of hardware or anything like that. It's a lot of different things.
I think any good designer can become a product designer.
Absolutely.
It's just having someone explain the process or the structure, how to think about problems differently. And I got that at Netflix. Like my buddy Ted was really critical in being a mentor and helping me understand that. But it's all design.
Yeah.
My friend Brian in Salt Lake City, he used to live here. We always joke around that when you ask a product designer what that means, they don't know. So what do you guys think it means? Like
tackle that one?
Sure, yeah. So I think, product design is not just visual design. It's not just how something looks. And it's most of the times not just like wireframes or even how it works. It's the culmination of how a product, how the user experience, how the visuals, and how it meets the business goals of the company that's building the product kind of all tie together. That's my interpretation of it. And I think that, that comes with a lot of like deep nuances, like platforms and code and design and all this other crazy stuff. Not saying you have to code. That's obviously like a hot button thing, I think.
we're not covering that topic.
Yeah, we're not.
Yeah. We're not going down that rabbit hole.
But I do think that that's the medium, right? Is a lot of products are digital, and digital runs on screens, and understanding how those ecosystems work and how they work on a business level is kind of how product design works in a broad kind of definition. Yeah, that's my.
Aubrey, I know you could tackle that one. You're so smart.
I've always just been, I spoke at this AIGA panel, and it was a mixture of product and marketing people, and a lot of the questions were more towards an in-house marketing context, and I started thinking, like, I'm not designing to sell a thing, I'm designing the thing that's being sold, and I think that's the big context switch from being like a traditional graphic or, advertising agency designer to product design. Whatever that thing being sold is, it's a very, like, a big context switch, right?
Sure.
Absolutely.
So, Josh, you were talking about communication and how that's really important for what you guys do. What are some other things that you guys wish non-designers and maybe even designers knew about UI or UX or product design or any of these things that we all seem very mystified by?
Good one.
That is a good one. I mean, realistically, I think it's very probably similar to the answer I gave before in that it's not necessarily a different type of design per se. It's just a different thought process and the relationships and the people you work with. I think in product design, you're working a lot more integrated with a bunch of different teams, whether it be product managers, whether it be, kind of even business development and all these different engineering teams and other designers of different formats, working with the marketing team to understand like what is being sold, and how do we make sure there's a consistency in evolving that message all the way through an actual experience. So I think in that sense, it's not necessarily one particular, like, here's a tactical thing you don't know about product design. It's more about like the where you sit in relationship of other people within different companies. And then, I think the best way to probably say it is that probably flip of you're working on that.
I'm just curious, from that perspective, how do you think research is different from product to non-product? Because I know that, because I haven't had a lot of agency like selling the thing in life, and I know that was the big difference for me, is understanding that a lot of product design is designing something, getting feedback, doing research, qualitative, quantitative, iterating. Do you see that similar process or like a parallel to that in marketing?
In marketing?
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I think there's you're going to identify different customer journeys in the app experience, but you're also going to identify them previously of the
outsiders
as well,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
Before they're coming in, what are they thinking? What are they doing? And so there's a lot of educational base that you can do prior to someone using the actual product itself to help inform and help make these decisions. So you can carry on. Whether or not everyone does, totally different story, but I think there's definitely consistencies that you can see very similar through.
So obviously, we're going to switch topics a bit. There's been a lot of focus, rightly so, on the ways to solve the lack of diversity in design and tech. What are some things that you've seen companies implementing that have been working and creating positive changes, whether it's SF or here?
So this is obviously a hot topic, and people
Very
talk
hot.
about it a lot. I think one of the things, and being like a white male, like I'm just trying to figure all this out and be like respectful and understand it. I think one of the statements that Jared Arando, he's a designer in San Francisco, he has a team, and he was saying, I wanted a diverse team, so I hired someone from Egypt and someone from India. And that just really stood out to me, and saying like there's only so much you can do as a company or a team or a manager, and if the majority of us in the room are male and female Caucasians, you can't expect to have a 50-50 design team if you're hiring from this pool. And if we value diversity, we obviously need to be aware and advocate for diversity in culture, whether that's politics or our community, whatever it is. But if you want to influence your company with diversity, you have to look beyond where there isn't like if you don't live in a diverse community, you can't expect to pull from that and have diversity. And so I that really like stood out to me, is like it's actually pretty simple. It's not easy. It's simple. It's a simple concept, but hard in practice. And I think people are being pushed to do that. I'll just say that for now.
Josh, what do you think?
I mean, I think there's...
You hire a lot.
I do hire, and I think a lot of it is understanding that there's, people on one end of things, but realistically, there's tasks to be done, and I think this might speak to what you're saying. Like, tasks can be like people to provide that value can be found anywhere in any relationship. And I think it's important to understand that when you're going into these hiring modes, that you're not looking for a person, right? You're looking at someone who's going to come in and build something along with you, and looking at it more than just, filling a seat in the table, for instance. So when I'm thinking about that in just the way I hire is realistically like, there's no predefined person that I'm trying to bring in, right? And I think as soon as you start predefining that, you start narrowing that gap, right? And so you start, it could be like, okay, I'm looking for someone who is, needs that Google experience, okay, now I've just shrunk it to San Francisco. Now I need someone who has, X amount of word and ads. And so you start shrinking your gap as soon as you start having those predefined needs in your hiring. So I think keeping that as open as possible, and then understanding that different realms and different types of career sets, because a lot of what we're working on is brand new, right? And you're not going to find someone who comes in with that exact experience. So why narrow it from the beginning? And I think that's going to broaden the gap of the type of the people that are going to come in through the door and enable you to create that natural diversity. But there's definitely no clear solution to it.
I think that the companies that are, to the question of what are the companies that are doing it right, or what's a good example of tackling this problem, are companies that are paying attention to it, companies that are doing something. In the past, people just sat on their hands and said it's not a problem, or they ignored it or brushed it under the rug, and addressing it, I think, is a really good step in the right direction. And then if you're a manager, you're in the position to hire, from my experience, is just do it. So if I found somebody's portfolio that where they fit into a minority or a different gender, then that was an opportunity to diversify the team. And so I looked at that as a positive. And so seeking those sort of things as an opportunity to diversify your team, because you'll get more insights and better, just a better perspective than if it's just a bunch of white dudes. So
I heard a conversation on some podcast where they're talking about there's the value of having a diverse team, but as a manager or as you're building teams, the environment that sense for future people to come in, right? And how important it is to start with that of a level of diversity, whether it's gender, sex, orientation, whatever, race. Because if you're the odd man out, odd woman out, odd person out, coming into an environment that isn't like you, that's a different environment than feeling included, right? And so I think tech is actually doing a good job about it because we're being transparent and being honest. There's lots of industries that are terrible at this, and so I'm glad that they're at least talking about it and having the hard conversations.
Right. Jen and I, my sister, always talk about this. Like, everyone always talks about culture fit in tech and design. It's like the hot button thing. But somebody was talking on a podcast the other day, this woman, and she was saying, like, I don't like drinking beer and I don't play ping pong. So that's kind of unfair to say that that's like a requirement for me to get hired. So as much as
that's bro culture, right? Like one culture. That's
right.
Not culture in
but
general.
It's become like synonymous with like you have to have the ping pong table, you have to have the beers on tap. Yeah. So like, does that kind of get in the way?
Yeah, for sure, right? That's a problem. And so again, like, I can only speak from my experience. I think the last few people, the team that was at Science, the product team, it was like 10 people, but two white guys. That was it. And then the rest of the people were very diverse. And so I think you have to push for that, and then you won't get. We didn't have a ping pong table, and in fact, when they brought one in and we heard that pop pop pop, we were like, get that out of here. I don't want that. And we found things that we liked in common, and we found things that were new, and we learned from each other, and that was really valuable. And so playing ping pong, drinking beer all the time, seems boring. Get out of that, and try something different. I think that's the lesson to be learned there, and avoid those bro culturism.
Yeah.
I think there's a difference between like tech in general and design. So like most at Netflix and Google, most of my teams, I wasn't the majority. I was one of the only white guys, and I loved it. And most of yes, like Google has beer and ping pong tables, but they also have like a group for people that don't drink, and they have a group for everything. because they're Google.
Because it's Google.
They've got like people that like LARP and like Slack, like literally everything. There's dudes with like swords.
Yeah, I
like,
saw them.
shit,
Yeah.
Seriously, I walked through a conference room and they're like, "Excuse me," and they're like had their Kotaku. You'll fit in with somebody at Google.
Yeah.
But I think the funny thing is that like on the diverse design teams I was on, our unity was like design and art. So we would go to an art gallery, we would tour this other studio, or food was always like a uniting thing.
Cool.
And so that became kind of what we did. I think a lot of the beer ping pong cultures very much more the engineering culture that kind of eventually brought design in. Like design wasn't even a part of tech when it started, right? Like every initial design or every initial tech startup like had terrible design, right? Like every logo was bad because they didn't have designers. So we're just kind of the tail end of it. And I would say design in general has been doing a better job at diversity and culture than tech at large or engineering.
So I always think about this. I was talking with Jeff Tehan about this like a few months ago. We were talking about how terrible the user interface and experience is on cars, like your car interface. And it's always funny to me, these very daily things that we really need and need to work well seem to be so neglected, and things like self-driving cars are being so focused on. How do we stay in touch with the real problems and the real things that need to be solved?
So I have some thoughts on this.
Let's hear 'em.
I think we're in a transitional period with vehicles, right, where they will drive themselves, and the interface will make sense to be like a traditional, like screen input. But what stinks about car interfaces today is that, in my opinion, is that sometimes you need a button. You need to feel some ridges, or one knob's bigger than the other because you got a multi-ton piece of metal flying down the highway. It's not really optimal to try to read some small fonts on a screen and tap through an interface. And I think that's actually the blight of the product designer arriving on the scene, where an industrial designer may have been the kind of the best solution for that interface. And so I think it's going to suck until the robots are driving. That's my opinion. Because it's pretty hard to do both, right, when you're in the car. And even Tesla, which is a pretty cool thing, some stuff is kind of whack on that interface, I think. And so it's weird. And sometimes you just want a button, or you want some like grippy knob or something you can click. And because you can't look down, you got to, Hurst and I, he's here, we commuted to Science for a couple years together, and 405, you can't be messing around with some touch UI on that thing. It's a death zone. So I think buttons and stuff are killer. That's my opinion of car interfaces.
So like in a broader way though, like there's all these things that are left over from before tech was even a thing. Like we're still using planes that were designed to house bombs in the war, There's a lot of things that are just left over that haven't been reconsidered. Like who's supposed to be in charge of making sure that we're updating things like that everyday people are using? I mean, VR is great and all, but you know what I mean?
So I think I work on automotive, so I'm just going to get broad because I probably know too much. I think that there's a lot of problems that need to be solved that one probably are, but they're systematically take a long time to see the light of day. So probably are people working on it, and we're just not seeing it because they're old businesses that don't move like tech. The converse of that is I think that everyone wants to work on the next photo, social, sexy thing. And there's a ton of like legitimate problems in, agriculture and medical and finance that designers don't want to work on. And I think that's kind of the travesty, is that there's actual real problems that people don't want to work on, actually harder problems to solve. And people are like, no, let's make emojis or like photo sharing apps. And those things like unite people and share culture, connect, whatever, blah. But like there's real problems that need to be, like I worked on analytics that's like measures the internet, which is really important. It's fucking hard. It's really hard. And I work on Azure Auto, which is like a consumer product, and that's fun. And so like I'm guilty of that. But I think there's a lot of products that don't get the limelight and the cool, sexy commercial with the peppy music that like no designer wants to work on. And I think that that's an issue of like kind of the cockiness and the expectation of like, oh, I built this cool, fun thing. There's a lot of like nitty gritty problems that need to be solved that I don't think designers are like running to. And I think that's an issue.
Yeah. You asked that question earlier about like how do you get into product design? Like, isn't it like a famous for being famous cycle for infinity? Go do some shit jobs and redesign like an ultrasound machine or something. Work at a company like that. They'll probably give you a shot because everybody else wants to work on Snapchat and like optimizing, sending like 30-second videos to each other. So there's probably a lot of cool problems you can solve. Maybe that answers 2 questions.
You've worked on real products. What do you
Yeah, and I mean, I would say there's somewhat of this like iPhone-itis thing where a lot of the problems we're trying to solve are trying to do a lot in trying to solve a very simple problem a lot of the time. And I'm going to just go ahead and use the Nest example. You know, Nest was a problem that a lot of people didn't even realize was a problem for them, right? Until there was a solution that was very simple and easier for them to implement into their lives. And it wasn't trying to be a thermostat plus a microwave plus a refrigerator all in one. It was more of a very simple solution to a simple problem. And I think that's where, you know, especially speaking of cars and things like that, like if you look at your interfaces, they're trying to do 100 things, right? And instead of like, what can we do to identify simpler problems and define them and really kind of provide solutions that help those things as opposed to trying to add on a lot of different things. And I think it's just the nature of what we're seeing in small devices and capabilities, and the capabilities are awesome. And yes, you might be able to make these different products do amazing different things, but at the same time, like trying to figure out what are the most simplest formats. And it's a hard thing to do at the same time, because as soon as you have one idea, it stems into another idea and it stems into another idea, but it's being able to find a way of control and really focus on what it is.
Some companies don't want the change, right?
Yeah.
Like I worked at Netflix, like the cable industry is trying to innovate, but they have a model they want to stick to, right? Like they don't want to simplify it because that makes them less money. I think there's a lot of industries that have their niche and they want, like the music industry died because they didn't want to make it simpler and efficient for the user, right? And so I think, and from a design standpoint, we want to make things simpler and better for the user. But that's not always the best business. So I think you see a lot of stagnation from that as well.
Right. So there's been a lot of rebrands recently for big companies that people are just raging over, so many feelings. So, you know, there's like Airbnb, there's Instagram, there's all these companies. So like, what are your guys' weigh-in on all these like opinions, and how much does it matter, and should they stop posting about it?
I mean, there's the people that care are only going to care for the next X amount of time until something else fades on. There's majority of people don't give a shit.
Right. It's just us and our own bubble.
And it's like, and I look at it as like, if a company feels they need to reimagine themselves, like that is an internal decision. And I want people to, or I would rather prefer a company go through that than feel they're living a dying path and not try to innovate themselves. And if it takes a rebrand, do it. Like, we'll adjust.
But how much do companies, like I feel like in that sense, sometimes we could look back to the more classic brands, like the Coca-Colas. Like I feel like we don't need to rebrand every 3 months just because.
That's a great example, right? Like the Coca-Cola example. Made the logo in 1810 or whatever the hell. It's been the same one. It's red can. It doesn't scale, right? You shrink that down to 16 pixels. It probably looks like crap. They don't care. And then you have Pepsi. Maybe you like Pepsi. That's fine, I guess. But that's kind of weird.
No one does.
Rebrand all the time, and I think that they kind of chisel away at their brand equity every time they do that. And I wonder what the effects are of companies that do that, tech companies that do that too regularly as well, right? So Airbnb and Instagram, these companies are babies compared to these other companies that set their logo and then they ride that thing for 100 years. So I wonder, where does it end? Maybe it's just the nature of the industry to change often. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, Airbnb, like it looked like a sticker, and then all the kind of funny comments that everyone made, and then it was somebody else's brand and right? It's all, everything is like some sort of joke, right? But
anyone that's worked at a company that's larger than like 10 people knows that it's much more than just the visual, right? Like. I was at Netflix and Google when they went through redesigns, and it's like design is just one small part of a rebrand. And so it's really unfair. It's like an unsolicited redesign. Like you don't know the context or the initiatives or anything that's going into that decision. So you can judge it on an aesthetic value, but there's so much more that goes into that. So that's like me speaking internally. Like being like sympathetic. But also, I think like comparing Coca-Cola to like Airbnb or Instagram, I think the market's just very different. Like what a brand was very different. It was in like steel and on billboards, and like no one's looking at billboards because they're on their cell phones, right? Like it's a very different market, and it's moving at a faster pace. The mediums are different. And so branding in general, I think, is much different. It's much more than just a mark now. I think Instagram's brand equity is their experience, not their icon. Because everyone's still opening the icon they hate, right? Like, and I think that, or if like Coke redesigned their logo and it was crappy and it had a gradient, you would still drink Coke, right? And I think that's matter. Like that's anyone that knows branding, that's what branding is.
Well, no, that's not when they did the new Coke, that blew it.
People,
It
people
sucked.
like riot.
And they had to revert, like Gap did, right? You see a lot of brands do this too. They make a redesign and then everyone's like, hell no, I'm not buying those shorts or whatever anymore. And the brand's like, we're sorry, we'll put it back, we're really sorry. Yeah. And then they just look silly, right? Like, then it just looks like an exercise in stupidity in public.
Right.
But brand, you would agree, brand is much more than, like brand is the experience of the physical products and the delight.
For sure.
And everything
It is,
else.
But I think when you change it all the time, it's like, what can I
recognizability.
rely on with you? Just change? That seems like hard to. And I think you'll see that there's less loyalty on things like platforms, right? Like Facebook changes their logo all the time, and Google and so on, and so everyone, kind of wanders around and goes to Snapchat. But I'm not drinking any Pepsis anytime soon, right? And so I wonder if there's some. We'll see, right? It's still new, but I wonder if there's some degradation to the loyalty that comes with this change. Maybe it's just because I'm an old dad and I'm like, I want to stay the same, and that might be my bias, but that's my 2 cents on it.
Okay, we'll ask one more question and then we'll open up to the audience for questions. What do you guys see being in touch with the tech scene? What's the next big thing coming down the pike? Should we start with Josh Hemsley?
We should start with Joel. Just tell us all secrets.
Yeah, come on, Joel.
Yeah, I want to know the secret.
Tell us the Google secrets.
So I think we've been living in a very like a renaissance of tech where like there's a long while where there was like not very much, not anything interesting happening. I mean, there's iPods and stuff, but like the tech space was kind of like there was laptops and desktops and MP3 players, and that lasted a long time. And there was like, oh shit, there's an iPhone. And there was this ton of innovation. There's tablets that have kind of hit. But I think we're going to hit another long streak of like, we have this great tech. And then there's VR and bots and all this other stuff, self-driving cars and robots. But I think for those to actually mature to where there's actually a marketplace and something that's applicable for developers to like build products that people actually use, I don't think there is anything hitting big that's going to come soon. I think there's like a graph that someone probably understands that I don't, of where like there's components and technology that needs to get significantly better to see significant change, and we've experienced that, but I don't think we're going to see it anytime soon. And that's my like dumb non-technical perspective, but I've seen some stuff in VR. I've seen the self-driving cars, and it seems like even Glass, like Google Glass, was really cool, and people got like punched in the face for wearing it. Like, it's going to be a long time before these things are like culturally acceptable and like consumer products, right? So I don't think I think we're going to be sitting in this context. It's going to be getting better and new opportunities, sensors, whatnot. But I would say maybe Internet of Things, like the connected house, that kind of stuff is very like tangible. It's I think a little less exciting.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit different in the sense that I think where things could evolve in is more of an iterative approach to everyday things or things that we're not expecting. I think we're already starting to see the ability that technology enables things that we didn't realize we could do, but something as simple as music, right? You're able to put out music and iterate on that music as it's out there already in the world. Listen to Kanye and then he releases a version release of it, right? Like, and it's like, I think there's just little things like that will, hopefully in a more practical sense, but that technology is going to announce it's not a big necessarily reveal of things, but it's something that's almost like a growing entity as you're evolving it because of the tech that's built inside of it. So whatever that may be, it becomes live, and that obviously can have its pros and cons with no one likes software updates because they're a pain in the ass. But I think seeing that in more things will allow us to then learn in real time as we're building technology throughout the world, essentially.
I think that I think those things, like Internet of Things, that seems cool. But I think like the next big thing, my opinion of this, is and like kind of speaking to what you were talking about, the graph, like the inflection point of, I don't know when that'll happen, but I do think the next like sea change thing will be when augmented or mixed reality and virtual reality become platforms that are big enough where people can decide what sort of existence that they want to have. Because in virtual reality, it seems salient that you could pick your life. You could pick to only see everyone as a starfish, or you could pick, right? You could pick to live in a giant house, even though you live in a super small, building in a country that maybe doesn't even have big houses, or has very few of them. And then, or you could pick to overlay data on your entire life and the data you choose to see. And you could turn that off maybe and see a world that doesn't have signs and blinking lights and stoplights and all that stuff. And so I think when we get to the point when that's kind of common to happen, I think that'll be a big deal, because it'll be interesting to see what people choose, whether they choose to live in the Matrix or they choose to pick to see data on top of the real world. It's gonna be crazy.
I think technologically, like, if you look at the difference from like old tech to like smartphones and the stuff we use today, like the touch screen was a big deal. And I think once voice is actually mature enough to be reliable, and we can move away from physical screens, like that's gonna blow everything out.
Yeah,
because then we're not like connected to devices, and we have Jarvis and all this crazy. Everything is like listening to us, and as soon as like Google or someone can figure that out, I think most of the people that I know working on really cool stuff aren't designing pixels, right? And experience design is much more multi-input based, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's gesture or voice or anything else. And so I think that once we can figure that out, I think we'll see a renaissance. But for a while, we'll be touching buttons on screens, I think.
Buttons and knobs for Aubrey. All right, cool. Well, let's take a few questions from the audience. Do we have any right off the bat? Josh.
You said a lot of designers are wanting to go to like sexy projects like tech. Why does a lot of tech look really bad?
What specifically? What looks bad?
Facebook is a horrible design. It's ugly.
Well, so I would challenge that like design is like Facebook is actually really good design because the majority of the world is on it because it works well. And so its function isn't to look pretty. And if it looked pretty, it would fail. And that was something that I realized, the stuff that I thought was the best, you give to Susie in rural Illinois, and she doesn't know how to use it. And so usability and understanding what works versus what looks good. What looks good is subjective.
I guess the idea I'm kind of ripping off. I'll give it its source. Steve Jobs in this interview called The Lost Interviews, which was on Netflix for a while, he said that Microsoft makes a really good operating system. They just have no taste. That it worked well, it just was ugly. And that was the main difference between Apple and Microsoft.
Yeah, but Microsoft's like net worth as a company, their market share, their market valuation was like dwarfed Apple's. And Steve Jobs was probably saying some of that stuff out of insecurity that his own company was like free falling into bankruptcy or whatever, right? So like, yeah, it didn't look good, but it worked. Same for Facebook. 1 billion people every day use it. Maybe you don't think it looks good. I think like it can get a little boring, right? Everything's blue and sure, but it works.
What about
that's a good
platform?
design to address. If it can work for 1 billion people, so many different cultures, demographics, education levels, various tastes, and still get that much traction in regular use, I would say it's probably one of the better design products. I would argue it's one of the best design products given those constraints. Because it's hard to design for that many people, you know? It's hard.
It's easy to make a design that looks well, that looks good. It's hard to make a design that works good in all languages and blind people and people that are blind. To make something that works for everyone is really hard. In the same way that brands Like global brands are very boring because they have to apply for everyone. Hurley can have a cool brand because they are for action sports. It's not the same for GE. And I think that a lot of big tech brands, their UX might not be as interesting or aesthetically pleasing, but it works for everyone. And that's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah.
And I would
It's so constrained.
And I would look at it beyond just what you see on that news feed as well. I think there's amazing things that they're doing behind the scenes, that there's beautiful storytelling and relationship connections that they're making. For instance, if you go and Google their Facebook augmented system for that voice of hearing deaf people, watch that video and watch it and tell me it's not beautiful. Like, it's an incredible story, what they built from a technology standpoint and how they connect the dots. Like, I think it's just a matter of looking at it from a visual perspective versus an experience perspective.
Do anywhere? Oh, Jen Hood.
Hi, my name is Divergis Jones. I'm really enjoying the discussion on Pepsi. You're talking to the senior marketing manager on Pepsi during the whole week.
Put my mouth.
What I would like to share with you
Yeah.
Yes.
What put Pepsi on the map was the Pepsi Challenge. And anytime you tell the world that you beat Coke, the world's most dominant beverage at that time, probably still the same, 52 to 48, you become incredibly powerful. And that's really what got Pepsi going. When I was there, the strategic issues associated with Pepsi were so big, we thought we needed to, clearly create something mega in order to really damage Coke. Okay, so we had to transition from the Pepsi Challenge to something else. The code name for what we called what we were going to do was big event marketing. And what the big event ultimately turned out to be was the Michael Jackson music marketing effort, the Victory Tour. I actually was down at USC the other day talking, 2 weeks ago, talking about a few things. I actually have the original Pepsi Victory can and whatnot, which is really damaged. There's no liquid in it whatsoever. But here's what the real dynamic is. That campaign didn't just come out of, a vacuum. The strategic research that was done, which was Pepsi's perception of itself, Pepsi's perception of Coke, Coke's perception of itself, and Coke's perception of Pepsi. And what we found from doing that research was there was no way we were going to compete with this dominant trademark on their turf. So if we use the age continuum, we found out Coke was apple pie, Americana, and old. We were young, youthful, radical, and crazy. And that's what really, drove the situation. What you may not know is the only time in the history of brand Pepsi that it ever exceeded Coke in advertising was during the Michael Jackson campaign. So it's really pretty powerful stuff. So I just want to kind of share that. I've got two questions. I'm a strategic marketer, a lot of consumer packaged goods, but I'm involved in technology. And I wanted to understand when the portfolio, and I'm using this as an example, it may not be the case because some of you guys were at Apple or whatever. Let's say the product portfolio from a visionary standpoint was iPod, iTouch, iPhone, iPad, whatever. Who makes that strategic decision at Apple? We're not just talking about one product. I mean, I looked at a lot of Steve Jobs videos and also read a few books. And his whole philosophy was, way back in the day, Apple's going to be such a powerful brand that people are going to want to have multiple Apples in their home. We didn't know what it was going to look like, but that was his vision. So I just wanted to understand how does that happen? Is that marketing? Is that strategic planning? Is that product development or design? Where does that stuff come from?
Yeah, I was actually asked a very similar question earlier today. And I think it's going to definitely vary based on the type of leader you have at the head. I've experienced two different sides of it. I've worked with Tony Fadell at Nest, and he was extremely hands-on, knows exactly what he wants, and he is very tactical in everything that he's seeing through all the way through. And you're kind of following in step of his lead, for instance. He surrounds himself with very brilliant minds across the world, but it is his ship. He's defining the roadmap, and it was very clear. On the flip side of where I am today, I have a very strong visionary CEO who is leading the charge, and he is showing a map, 5 years out and has that dream, but he's facilitating people who, hey, connect the dots here. I'm hiring the people to actually connect the dots and help me facilitate the now in between then. So I think you definitely have your different formats. I don't think there's a one secret sauce to what that happens. I think it's dependent on that leadership and the people you can actually bring in. I think that's, in this culture of where we are, a lot of it is going to be probably dependent on the talent that you can bring into the company and how you can actually, from a top-down leadership executive side of things, be able to formulate your plan accordingly, and then also have the kind that can evolve. I think that's one thing with the tech is that it's going to shift, right? Like you're going to have, it's not one thing in the hardware space is it was very defined because you had to be very defined because it was working in 9-month increment release stages, and you couldn't shift around. Whereas in the software space, you're going to evolve, you're going to adapt, and you're going to have to figure out how to maneuver your way there. But I think having a clear visionary of figure out how to get me beyond this point can be a very powerful thing. But
The other thing that's interesting, I don't understand what either Coke or Pepsi is doing with their logos, but that would have been sacrilege in my day. You would have never done that. The other question I have is relative to Silicon Beach, Santa Monica. How does the ecosystem in Silicon Beach versus, let's say, Orange County, how does it differ? Are there things that they're doing right? I mean, we all know it's not Silicon Valley, but is there any big difference between those two environments?
that's all you.
Yeah, so I worked there for 3 years, and I have an impression of being there and here. I commuted there and was there a few days a week. I think the difference there is that most of what goes on in Silicon Beach is in Santa Monica or parts of Venice, and it's pretty close. And I think that kind of piggybacks on what you said, the convenience factor of who can you get coffee with or lunch with easy. And in LA specifically, going from Santa Monica to WeHo at 4 p.m. is let's do it tomorrow. Not going to happen, right? So there is a level of proximity and closeness and eventing that happens there that creates a tight-knit community, at least from my perspective. And then they have a lot of things there that we maybe don't have enough of in Orange County, which are incubators and accelerators. Like there's Mucker Labs and there's science and there's all these different entities that empower people with ideas to build and create a thing and then make a company and then hire people and boop, 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 and it starts moving out. There's a little bit less of that here, and I think that, I don't know, there's no reason why, other than I think people just are wary about the potential for talent, right? There is talent here. I think people just don't understand that, right? A lot of people that I know in the Bay Area ask, why do you live in Orange County? And I don't think they know that there's so many good designers here, which is kind of funny, right? Because there's a starve for designers in the Bay Area. There are very few, but there's maybe an abundance here. So I think that's a couple things that LA, the LA tech scene does well, is that they have kind of a geographically tight-knit group. They do a lot of events, and then there is kind of money and programs to help people who may not have a network or an alumni system like you worked at early Google or something like that. And so they kind of have bootstrapped the network a little bit there. And I don't think that's happened yet in Orange County. That's my opinion.
Yeah, my question was, culturally, there's this idea that spending time, spending time on apps and things and technology in your phone, it's still kind of a bad thing, right? It's an addiction that it might be cool, but it's at the expense of real relationships or things like that. I know I myself find myself fighting my urge to spend more and more time using my phone. And then as you guys were mentioning about even on the creating side of things, like working till 10 p.m., falling asleep on your laptop, or virtual reality in the future, being able to pick between the real world and this fabricated. I guess from the industry side of things, is there a concern or a consciousness of, we're creating things that are really cool and we're excited about them, but could these be hurting human society, or is it more like, that's not our responsibility. We want people to use our products as much as possible. If they ruin their life staying on it all day, that's their problem. What is the thinking, both, I guess, in the industry and then personally for y'all? How do you balance, like, creating, engaging these products, and then your, I guess, physical world relationships? I don't want to say real world because I feel like technology is part of our real world now, but it's physical versus digital world.
Yeah, so when I was at Netflix, I worked with one of the design leads that was working on kids content. And there was a conversation, I'm going to paraphrase, it was like, we need to get the kids watching more things. And I was like, is that really like the right thing though? Like, is that really what we're trying to do? And as a business model, that is, right? And I think that like Netflix has had good change. It's like made content and creatives a better place for that to exist, where it's in favor of the user, where you can watch what you want, people can make what they want. And I think that's a better thing in the end. I know that there's conversations about the consequences of what we create. I do think it is partially on culture to define that. Like, people thought cars were bad, right? We're all gonna die and our like skin was gonna fall off because it went too fast. So I think there's resistance to change, but you could also argue that change is eventually gonna like put us into chairs with virtual reality where we don't talk anymore. So I value technology, and I think that we're connecting in different ways. I just think our culture hasn't figured out how to gain what we lose and the new connections we have. So like everyone in this room I knew and met basically through Twitter. Like, I got into this industry through Twitter, all the people on connecting things, and I knew through Twitter and Dribble, and like now we're friends. But just like cell phones, like, we don't know the etiquette right now. We're defining social etiquette. And I think there is a huge risk to like keep ourselves accountable. But yeah, Mike, like Propaganda's song, right? His spoken word about being present. Like, I think there's something there that we can't lose, for sure.
I think we have time for one more, maybe two. Jen Hood, should we really give you one, or?
No, I got a question.
Oh, Mark Hemian in the house.
Hi, Mark. So, what are things? So it's cool to hear the Pepsi guy talk. I don't like. Just a quick thought. There's a lot of older folks who've done really cool things. Yeah. I don't want to stand up, man. There's a lot of older folks down here who've done really cool things, but like Broadcom sells or whoever, and then these dudes like go on their boats and they don't do anything to this community, and it really bums me out. So what can the younger generation do to guilt the old dudes to give us their money so that we can build stuff? That's question A. Question B is, in my opinion, I think the designers here are better than any designer in the world.
Yes.
By far. And the reason is, I got to rant, because we have aesthetic and taste. The whole country steals everything from here, surf and skate culture. The problem is the graphic designers don't have a lot of faith in themselves and they get taken advantage of. So what would your advice be to graphic designers who are getting paid $400 for a t-shirt design? Understand that they could get paid 50 grand to develop someone's app. Yeah. And it's not hard. I can teach a monkey how to product design. I can't teach a monkey taste. You know what I mean? And you guys have it. I'm guilty. I feel really bad. I've moved back from San Francisco. I've probably placed 12 people who lived here up there. Because they were awesome. I know, it's
Mark,
bad behavior.
It's bad behavior.
Yeah.
You pulled me down.
I pulled you back. So so that's a two-part question. I can repeat if you like.
Yeah, so I have thoughts on that. About part A, how can you get these boat dwellers to put their money something here, right? And I think it piggybacks on the second part, and that's to start building some undeniably cool stuff locally. Yep. That attracts attention, right? A lot of early money that got into successful companies in LA was local money, right? Dollar Shave Club, the first dollars in that were science. And then they went on and got institutional rounds from places that have more money. But a lot of LA companies wanted to be a part of that too, right? And so I think that if you build something here and you're local and accessible, you can attract local and accessible investors. Maybe, I mean, they don't want to miss the boat, right? No pun intended on that. On something that was right in their backyard. And so I think then the $400 T-shirt thing, like this is something that I used to do when I was younger. I'd see a younger designer. I'd see ads. Like I remember I made a website out of an ESPN X Games ad that I saw. So it was for like this local salon in this boutique salon in Charleston. And the ad was super cool, and I saw some like motion graphics, and I thought that'd be a really cool way to animate a menu in and take some of these aesthetic pointers from this ad and put it into a UI. And so that was how I started thinking, like, how can I make that cool looking thing into a UI, and how can I take that good aesthetic and apply it into something like an interface? And so if you can make cool T-shirts, then like start making it into cool UIs. Like try some stuff and share it with people and see if it's bad or good. You'll learn that stuff. Like Mark said, you can learn what sucks pretty fast. I don't know if a monkey could learn it, but I think that you could you can pick up the tricks pretty quickly with that. And so if you have that taste and talent, it goes a long way.
Yeah, I think this might be very similar, is building to your strengths, right? Like I think a culture in the Bay Area is engineering. It's engineering first, and they build something, and then the design kind of comes around it and wraps around it. And I think here we have a very artist-based community, and figuring out how do we do that. And I think it is partially the responsibility of the tech companies here to acknowledge what types of talent are here and not try to follow suit of whatever's happening in the Bay Area. I had a tweet exchange with Josh Ariza the other day, and it was like, he was like, do I have to become a product designer, or am I going to become non-existent, like a dinosaur? And I was like, absolutely not. Like, I would want you on my team, even though you're not a product designer, because you can bring what this community understands and what we can evolve as a kind of a smaller community and evolve that, as Mark was saying, like, people do look here. Like,
I found a boat dweller.
Hi, guys. My name's Ed Pope, and just to address that question of giving back, so I had a number of very big exits in my life, and located here for the purpose of forming a fund consisting only of super highly successful tech investors. So it's household names, it's folks that are friends, have been friends for a long time. There are 50 of us, and we are choosing to locate here in Orange County and invest in businesses in Orange County. We're here sort of in partnership with UCI, and I think this ecosystem has a real shot at growing. And to address your question about what the boat folks do with our money, there's boats for sure, but I will share with you that at some point in your life, the giving back that you do becomes anonymous. And so the folks that are really, really giving back, the Henry Samuelis and those folks, myself and others, are doing it completely anonymously. And so you don't hear about that, but you might see us on our boats. Thank you.
Just to tag on to that, I think it's like this is the genesis of what needs to happen. Well, like I think that the people are here and the money's here. It's the form and the culture for boat dwellers and nerds to be in the same room. And I think if we're both doing our jobs and creating cool things, and like I fly to the Bay Area a lot, and I meet VPs and founders and everyone important flying up to do business, and it's like we all live here. There's just no place for us to all meet each other. I meet them on a Southwest flight. And so the more that we can meet each other here, we don't need to go up to the Bay Area. And so I think this is like a great place for that to get started for sure.
Yeah.
And on that note of praise, we will end this night. Thanks so much, guys.